Hi everyone, I want to talk a little bit about the Cluster Arrow Marauder Demon Hunter. You might have seen my Multishot 150 solo clear already. If not, you can go check it out if you like. There was not really any doubt that Multishot would be the strongest version of this build, but the set actually buffs a lot more skills than that. There's Cluster Arrow, there's Impale, there's Elemental Arrow, and there's Chakram. And most of these skills are kind of forgotten and not really used for anything. Cluster Arrow is usually the go-to skill for Marauders, at least on the live servers, unless you're playing this Hanging Arrow variation these days. And the problem is that the Hellcat Waistguard does not apply to the sentries, which is probably a good thing because it would probably be very annoying to actually play such a build. But without this damage multiplier, Cluster Bombs is not a viable choice because all damage comes from the sentries and it missed the most important multiplier. So this leads us to play with the other Cluster Arrow runes, namely the Rocket runes Maelstrom and Shooting Stars, or the Loaded for Bear, which is typically the go-to choice for the old N6 M4 builds, which unfortunately have completely died with this patch, because it was already kind of outclassed by N6 God 4, and now with the nerf to the 4-piece bonus without the 400% extra damage, there's basically no hope left for N6 M4. So the new Marauder is going to be the Sentry build from now on, and I don't think that anything is going to change about that. Now the biggest issue that the Cluster Arrow has is that it only has one real multiplier, which is the Manticore, and that one is not exactly very powerful. It's only a plus 300% damage bonus, which compared to the Multishot with Yanks, which is a 200% bonus, and Deadman's Legacy, which is another 200% bonus, and also the attack speed effect, which is another 50% bonus from Yanks, and this double hit effect below 60% health, which is probably something like a 40-50% increase as well. You just can't really compete with the multipliers that the Multishot brings. There are some other perks of the Cluster Arrow, namely that it has infinite range, so when you set up a sentry and you shoot it from very far away, it will actually fly all across the entire map. So when you have like a big open map, you will see this here, it will just shoot from off screen basically to wherever you are, as long as there's an unbroken line of sight. So that's actually quite good about it, especially when you're pushing and you're going for big open maps like Festering Woods and Battlefields. This helps to boost it a little bit, but it's not really quite the same. One advantage of the whole thing is that you actually have a free weapon slot, because you don't need a second quiver like Multishot does, so you can actually use some of the other choices that the Demon Hunter has, which unfortunately is not that much, but I've been playing around with Odyssey's End. That was actually quite strong, but yeah, it just helps a little bit because you don't really have much time to apply Entangling Shot to most things. You can play around the COE timer a little bit and try to entangle stuff, but it's not like God the Age where you just entangle like 6 times a second. Here you have a slow crossbow with 1.1 attacks per second and a little bit of attack speed bonus here and there. So it's like 4 times slower or something like that. And it just takes forever to try to entangle a pull. So most of the time you deal most of the AoE damage without it. And then maybe when there's like a few targets left, you can start entangling them a little bit. At least in Season 25 this seems to be the best choice, because the Essence of Angus gem can give you lots of cooldown reduction, so you don't really need the Dawn. But I guess on non-season or after Season 25 you would go with the Dawn here, just to have the Permanent Vengeance as most other builds. And that will probably help you out the most. With all that being said, Cluster Arrow is not looking that terrible. So I've done the 150 Multishot, and I've been messing around a little bit in farming with the Shooting Stars rune, the physical of the 2 rockets, and also the Maelstrom with the 3 rockets, they're a little bit weaker. And then also I was pushing with Loaded for Bear. And it seems like Cluster Arrow is something like 5 to 6 tiers behind, maybe 7 behind the Multishot. So it's not really the end of the world. So I was going into a GR 145, which is still very good, and I was able to progress my way through to the boss, but I also didn't have a Banisher Stricken in there, so the boss fight would probably be quite long as well compared to the Multishot. So overall it seems like Cluster Arrow would need a boost of something like 150%, 200% bonus maybe on top of what it already has, to be pretty much completely competitive with Multishot. I think right now would be a really good opportunity for Blizzard to actually start implementing a few other items that would also buff some of the other variations that Marauder can do, to have this set be kind of like the champion of all these other little forgotten Demon Hunter skills that no one has really been using, including Chakram and maybe even Elemental Arrow. One problem of Elemental Arrow, unfortunately, is that it melts the servers when you play with Ball Lightning, so they could buff Elemental Arrow but not buff Ball Lightning by just increasing the numbers on the Augustine's Panacea and just kind of like leave Elemental Arrow out of that. And the same with the Chakram, that doesn't really suit the Shadows build very much unless they want to do some really big mechanical changes, which I doubt will happen because they just gave Impale some extra AoE. But playing Chakram with sentries is actually also kind of fun. It has really cool animations and is something that a lot of people would be looking forward to. So they could just buff the Sword of Ill Will and the Quiver, the Spines of Seething Hatred. And it would be quite cool to see a Marauder set that actually uses this melee sword and then throws these Chakrams and has all these sentries also shooting Chakrams. I think that would be pretty hilarious if that was brought up to roughly the same level. And then you could see Demon Hunters with all these skills auto placed on the leaderboards. The items and the mechanics are all already there, so they just need a bit of a boost. So for Cluster Arrow, as I mentioned, it would be probably something like a 6-7 tier boost required to bring it up to the Multishot level. And for Chakram, I don't know exactly, this would have to be calculated, but I would say something like 15 tiers maybe or so. Same with the Elemental Arrow, it will be roughly around that number, so something like a ×10 multiplier would probably do the trick. And then you could have 3 different builds that you can play with the new Sentry set. Overall, I really like the new Marauder, so that was very fun. And you can definitely play Cluster Arrow a little bit if you don't care about being much weaker. But this is pretty much about it for the other viable choices. Right now, everything is very inflated from those soul shards on the PTR. So the build is roughly 15 tiers stronger than it would be on non-season. So you have to keep in mind that this, Cluster Arrow 145 or so would be considerably lower as well on the live servers without the season theme. So it does sound quite good right now, but that's mostly because everything is good right now, because everything just gets such a massive buff and the top builds are way ahead. So Inna, for example, would be completely obliterating GR 150 with a similar geared character. In terms of mechanical changes, I believe the Cluster Arrow doesn't really need much. It kind of feels cool to use on its own, especially with this infinite range mechanic. Elemental Arrow, on the other hand, feels just kind of bland, so it's just like click and shoot, and while that is actually kind of similar in how you play it, it just doesn't really feel great. It just has some cool graphical animations and that's about it. And I feel that if there was ever some kind of Elemental Arrow change to make it viable, it should also include some mechanical twist that makes it more exciting. I was thinking about something like where maybe you can change the runes on the fly in combat, or maybe something like you can actually equip multiple Elemental Arrow runes at the same time and then use them to make some combo or something like that. That would be pretty cool. And Chakram is probably also just fine how it is, because Chakram has never really been used for anything, and I think people would enjoy just playing with the skill. In any case, if you have any cool ideas or feedback, then just let me know, leave it here, and maybe we get some other updates to the Marauder set. But overall, I think Marauders, especially with the Multishot, is in a good shape. It's not really any kind of crazy top build, but it's gonna be somewhere in the top 10 or so of the solo builds in the game, and I think this is a very good point to land in for this build. It's gonna be the best on the Demon Hunter for sure, and a little bit above the God Demon Hunter most likely. So even if they don't touch the Multishot variation of it, it will already be a pretty solid rework, and there's not that much to be done for at least this variation. But the Multishot Marauders also kind of takes away the niche that Unhallowed Essence had with being the Multishot set. So while it's cool to play Marauders again, it is Multishot again, which is Unhallowed Essence. So it would be nice to have more variation for Marauders, and this is why I propose these other changes to the other skills. Let me know what you think. Hope you like this little video, and I'll see you guys next time.